right, so this is the second location. Now, again, this is an area that I've hunted before a couple years back, and what caught my attention on this spot is you can see there's some clear areas where there's been some clear cutting done, and that was the focal point of what really drew my attention. So what we've got here is basically this northern clear cut here. It's been there probably for, honestly, I don't know how long that clear cut has been done, but it's been there for several years. So there's a lot of new growth coming in. From the map, you can see that there's a lot of all the smaller or more immature pines are starting to grow up a little bit. So there's actually quite a few of them in there that are large enough to be able to hunt out of or hang a tree stand out of. There's additional clear cut that's only within the past 3 to 5 years. So there's a lot more smaller plants that are growing in there now. A lot of immature oaks and popple in this southern region. And then they did leave basically a strip in between the two clear cuts. That strip's probably 70 to 80 yards wide, with two significant groups of mature timber on either side of those clear cuts. Off to the west, we've got a swamp area where they have, basically have logged before, and there's kind of I guess I would say, where it looks like they planted some old, rye fields or whatnot. It's starting to grow in, kind of more of a, starting to grow in more and more with different weeds and forbs and, briars and whatnot, as well as a bunch of ferns are starting to grow in there. But then again, a big old patch of, swampland where it's just a lot of open grasses and marshland. So this spot initially caught my attention, just having that clear cut there. Just the idea that it seemed like, with that, significant cover to the north and those different patches where they, didn't clear cut, that this would be a good spot, basically as a food source for the deer, as well as, diving into the mapping a little bit more. Again, the next big thing is looking at the contours or the elevation differences. The north edge of this clear cut, there's a valley. Kind of turns into a bit of almost a strip of cedar swamp that runs through here. And then also there's a small creek that runs through that cedar swamp that dumps into the more swampland or that marsh further to the west. So we've got food from the clear cut, and then we got a water source, and then we've got a change in the type of cover that's in the area. So what I had done, that first year of scouting it, I kind of went into it hunting blind. And so what I did was I initially started out on the edge of the clear cut. So I basically hung out on the kind of the northern side of, this edge. Essentially I had a, wind that came out of essentially the southwest. So I parked off the 2-track to the east, walked down along the edge of the clear cut, and found my tree. And that very first sit, I actually had a pretty decent sized buck coming from the clear cut, heading north towards the rest of the timber to, I'm assuming bed down. Again, this is, mid to late October. So I think the first sighting I had with him was, I think it was around like October 22nd or something like that. So, it looked very promising that, I caught this buck out cruising. It was probably a good 40 minutes after daylight, and I had really high hopes that I would be able to catch up with this deer again. Next time through, about 4 days later, had similar conditions. So basically I moved to a different stand location where I came out originally, where this buck had came through and headed into the timber to the north the first time. Sat within bow range of that location around the same time, about 15 minutes probably later than I seen him the first time. What does he do? He comes out probably about 30 yards from the location where I sat originally, heading from the cover into the clear cut. So at this point, I'm feeling like I really don't know exactly what this buck's doing, why he flip-flopped his travel route when I had relatively the same conditions from one hunt to the other. Basically It was a high pressure day, so nice and sunny that morning. Wind direction was relatively the same. Temperature was relatively the same. It was certainly one of those things where I figured he would do the same thing, seeing as how I had essentially the same conditions, 2 hunts in a row. That same season, after that second time of seeing him, noticed that he funneled a lot of his movement down towards a focal point of the clear cut at a focal area where he crosses a 2-track that leads down into further south of the clear cut. The third hunt, I ended up moving into a patch of some mature pine, or maturing pine, I guess I should say, and try to catch up with him as that focal point, kind of that pinches him down, some of that movement. Again, same thing when it comes to terrain. We have this little bit of a ridge here. It's a low point on the east side of the clear cut, and then a high point here on the west end, essentially. And he seemed to be using that plateau or the edge of that kind of that ridge there for his movement as he moves south. Ultimately, the buck didn't come within range. He actually ended up spotting some does that were in the area, and it was more focused on them and not getting within bow range of me. So ultimately, I started scouting some more and looking further south, seeing as how I couldn't figure out or narrow down an area within bow range to be able to ambush him from the north side. So I traveled down to the south, thinking that he would focus his movements on the southern part of the clear cut, where this little pinch point is, where the cover is between the two different sections of clear cut. And sure enough, right on the end of, basically right smack dab in the middle of this strip, there's a bit of a high point and some thick cover between some more immature pines and some denser cover in comparison to more mature kind of open wood or open timber area to the east. Right here at that point, again, a change of the terrain. There were significant rubs and scrapes, and definitely what looked like to be a large-bodied deer that was bedding in this area. So definitely became a focal point of my scouting, or my focus where I thought I could ambush a deer. Unfortunately, here's the kicker. As you can see from the map, there's basically this area kind of sticks out as what would be considered an area of focus for a lot of different hunters. Sure enough, just to the northwest or northeast, of that spot, found multiple tree stands in the area. So a lot of the other hunters kind of found this spot as well, and kind of pinpointed it. Now, I had considered basically setting up it within the clear cut, somewhere around 60 to 70 yards from this location. The problem is because of how open it is, because the clear cut, even those few trees that you could set up a tree stand with, it's basically all that red pine where, climbing in and out of a tree stand, you can make a lot of noise and very difficult to get in there without being seen, as you climb the tree. Same thing occurred when trying to ambush them from the south. Same thing. You have to get, close enough to where you can ambush them, but then also the other tree stands are in area. You're gonna run the risk of having some hunter interference, whether you're interfering with someone else or they're interfering with you. So again, you could try to get creative and try to push into the area, but with the other hunter pressure in that area already, it's best to kind of take that spot as a loss and move on to a different location, essentially. So if I couldn't really hunt to the south, where there's clearly a lot more hunter pressure in the area, I proceeded to look to the north. So as we get into here, again, you got the cedar, creek bottom there, and it does rise up to a little bit in different elevation, and you have some intermittent pines along with, outside of that area, more mature timber. And just off that clear cut, just to the north of that cedar area, is an opening where it's kind of a, I really don't even know the plants that are growing in there, but they're about like knee-high plants, definitely some marshy area. Again, there's some cedars around the area. You've got different forbs growing in there, and and all around this area are multiple rubs and scrapes and trails that are traveling, essentially kind of all over from in here. So you got trails going on north and south, east and west, and just deer movement clearly in the area. Even to the north part of this little opening, did find what I have identified as winterberry. So there are some different berries and different food in that area. And again, with that opening, there are some grasses, other things that are clearly being, grown in there and being browsed on by deer. So, it's kind of that food source off the main food source that kind of caught my attention. And then the fact that it was further back into the cover, the idea is that these deer are going to feel more comfortable being around this little opening than they were to be able to come out to the larger clear cut. And then also the size of this opening is small enough where you're not going to run into like that larger clear cut of having just a vast array of area to cover and a ton of edge that these deer could be coming in and out of. So set up a camera, and basically it was this time in the season where I scouted it, but I didn't know exactly how to get in here without disrupting a lot of the deer movement. So I ultimately didn't hunt this location last year and just let my camera soak and gather intel. So ended up during the course of the summer or late summer, towards the 1st of September, went back in there to set up a new camera and basically found the same location where I had set up kind of a my scrape again, turned around to go set up my camera, and wouldn't you know, my camera from last year, I clearly had forgotten about it, was still on the tree, basically over the course of all winter long, as well as throughout the summer. So, it was kind of surprising coming across that, and wouldn't you know it, pull up the camera, and it was able to take pictures. The battery life lasted long enough where I had pictures all the way from, from essentially November or mid-November all the way up until June of this year before the camera finally died and stopped taking pictures. So was able to dive in and look at a lot of intel even throughout the course of the late season. And wouldn't you know, again, kind of what I suspected, the deer feel very comfortable moving in that area. There was a ton of daylight, movement from does to bucks. There's even a couple of them that were surprisingly where one very big body deer that had, he had a pretty decent rack, wasn't huge, but the size of the deer body wise indicates that he's definitely an older class deer, which really got my attention. As well as looking at throughout the course of the springtime after the snowfall or after the snow melt, this area actually completely floods out, where I had my mock scrape during the fall time was actually partly underwater for a good 2-3 months. That snow or that area really didn't start to dry out till about middle to end of May, when finally there was some dry ground again, in that area where I had originally put my camera. So went out there, let the camera soak for about a month. And I just went out there just this week, and sure enough, got, again, not too surprisingly, a bunch of pictures of does, morning, evening, night, middle of the day, just an area where they feel really comfortable being back here in this denser cover where there's not a lot of people that are focusing or tromping around this area. They feel very safe and secure in here. And again, even more surprising, or more not necessarily surprising, but I'm happy to see that I do have a picture of a nice mature buck that, again, basically I believe the time was at like 4:30, somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. He showed up on camera in this area, so he clearly doesn't live too far away. The fact that he's just barely, or that is well within daylight, and he's up on his feet moving around back here. So that's an area that, again, kind of had on my radar. It did have some good features where I definitely knew that that main clear cut was the big food source, but I couldn't really figure out how to narrow down on the buck movement. So I went from kind of what I knew and explored into what I didn't know. So basically looking at the further south, again, plenty of intel that would suggest that that's where you could ambush a buck or hunt. But the problem is too, that when it comes to public land, you're looking at a lot of other people have found the same spot as well. So looking the other direction, again, found a spot that's going to be more secluded, not nearly as well known or not targeted by other hunters, and that the intel does suggest that there are deer that are in the area, feel comfortable in there. But then the next stop was really trying to figure out, now that I got the intel that suggests, that the deer are there, the next thing is trying to figure out my access to get in and out. So ultimately, what I've decided to do is to utilize part of that cedar lowland area. So coming off a 2-track to the east, diving into just inside the wood line, traveling along that cedar swamp, a little cedar stretch there. Basically utilizing that is because it is mostly mature cedars where it's kind of wide open. The ground's soft, lots of moss and whatnot, so I can sneak in there and not make a bunch of noise. And then kind of take a beeline to the tree stand that I have set up within bow range of a mock scrape and the camera, as well as the opening. The vast majority of the traffic is trying to basically moving diagonal along with my access route, more or less moving east to west, moving kind of diagonal along, paralleling how that cedar swamp runs. So again, primarily for wind direction, I really want to look at something that's coming out of, essentially the north to, the west, or, the best case scenario would be something that would be directly out of the west, blowing my scent back to the direction where I came from for my exit, for my entry route. Thanks for watching this segment from the Am I Hunting podcast. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you share the show with your friends. If you do want to see more, you can tune into the full episode right here on the podcast playlist. And if you're on the go, you can always listen to the podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And I hope to see you on the next one.